Welcome to Sports Saved My Life. My name is Clayton Freck, and I'm the CEO and founder of Angel City Sports. We know the power of sport to change and, in some cases, save lives. We hear these compelling stories every day, and we created this show to share them with the world. Enjoy the show, and remember to like, follow, share, and comment. Welcome to Sports Save My Life by Angel City Sports. I am so excited today to interview Dana Mathewson, a fellow Californian, Paralympian, and one of our VIP coaches at the Angel City Games the last couple of years. She went to the University of Arizona. She competed in the Rio Paralympics. She won a gold medal at the Pan American Games in 2019. And she's competed at the US Open, British Open, Japan Open, really all over the world. And the one thing that I love about Dana is her attitude. She's always smiling, always up for a challenge. And truly, her joy is contagious. Dana, welcome to the show today.
That was the best intro. Honestly, I feel like my mom doesn't even say things that nice about me. So
come on.
That's a joke. If she heard that, she'd be upset. Mom, I'm kidding.
All right, I'm gonna call your mom and give her some coaching. Give her some coaching tips. All right, before we get going, I want to just if I only gave you 2 sentences to describe yourself, who's Dana?
Oh wow. A lot of times in these interviews, you get asked more or less the same questions. I have never been asked anything like that before.
That's good.
I know, it's really good. I think no matter what, me being a Paralympian and a tennis player would have to be in there. But I guess I would say, 2 sentences or less. My name is Dana Mathewson. I am a Paralympic wheelchair tennis player, and I'm a daughter, a sister, and a student.
That's good. That covers a lot of bases. You got,
and a dog mom, I guess, also.
And a dog mom, yes.
And a dog mom.
I love that. All right, so I want to start with really childhood, because I just feel like, we're all products of our childhood. And in your case, I feel like you offer the world a really interesting perspective, which is basically half your childhood was non-disabled, right? And then half your childhood, you had a disability.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that and start on the non-disabled half, because I think that's really interesting, right? And then there's a real change.
Yeah, definite shift. So yeah, like you said, I was born and raised in San Diego, California. Really ugly place to grow up, just awful.
I know, right? I always dreamed I was going to move to San Diego, by the way. I grew up in Santa Barbara, which is another beautiful place, but I don't know, I always loved San Diego, but
San Diego's so nice. I didn't appreciate it as much until I went away for college in Arizona and moved to London and stuff, but I love San Diego.
But you grew up in La Jolla, right? Or near there?
La Jolla. I grew up in University City.
But right there, yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. So yeah, I grew up with an older brother, Scott, and we're both really athletic. My mom signed us up for every extracurricular that she could, whether it was art class or dance class, gymnastics, swimming, all of that. So we were always doing something. And so really active in both school, sports, all that sort of thing. Did Girl Scouts. I think my mom just wanted us out of the house all the time, maybe.
By the way, that's part of the strategy.
Right? I think I'll probably adopt that same thing. But when I was 10 years old, I contracted a really rare autoimmune disease called transverse myelitis. So that's a fancy way of saying that my immune system attacked my spinal cord. And what happened was I was at soccer practice. Soccer was my main sport of choice. And I was at practice, and it was at the end, and we were doing those suicide sprints back and forth.
Love them.
Love them. And my back started to hurt really badly. And it was almost like someone was stabbing me. It was right in my tailbone region. And so the first thing that comes into your mind, obviously, is did I hit something? Did someone hit me? What's going on? Because this had never happened to me before. And I wasn't sick beforehand. There was no reason for this to happen.
And so with that, disease, you don't have any heads up.
No, none.
It's just, damn.
It's really weird. Like, basically, it can have a really sudden acute onset like I had. I think some people it can happen over a period of hours, some people it can happen over a period of days, but it's never like months and months
Yeah.
like MS or ALS or something like that. This one's more just like one and done. And so for me, it was a couple of hours. Like, I felt pain and it got progressively worse and worse. And then I remember my legs started to feel heavier and heavier.
Like
And
that day.
that day, yeah. So this was all, I think practice ended around 6:30. So this probably started around maybe 6 p.m. And I remember being driven home and I was screaming in the car just from the pain. And then my legs felt really heavy. I couldn't get up the stairs to my house without help from my best friend, Sarah, who was also in my carpool. So I
Yeah.
remember she helped me up into my living room. Both my parents were home. Luckily, both my parents are doctors, so they were able to see this and be like, something's wrong. Let's get her into the ER.
Yeah.
But I remember lying on the floor, and all of a sudden, you know that pins and needles feeling when something falls asleep on your body?
Mm.
It was like that from my waist down, just like that. And then I was like, okay,
You
this,
remember laying
yeah,
on your living room floor and that feeling like,
yeah. And then I remember really vividly looking down at my big toe and being like, okay, I'm going to try to move my foot. And then I looked down and I had that feeling in my head of what happens when you try to move something on your body. And then I looked, and then what I was trying to do wasn't matching what I was seeing. Like, I was trying to move my foot and nothing was happening. And I was like, this is so weird. What happened? I was running like 20 minutes ago. I was a completely quote unquote normal kid. Like, what's going on? And so then luckily my parents were like, okay, we have to go. They put me lying down in the back of our minivan and just drove me to the hospital.
oh my God.
Probably isn't the most safe thing because I had a spinal cord injury, but like I trusted them. They knew what they were doing. Like, I think they braced my neck or something.
Right.
And
They didn't really know what was going
no,
on.
they knew something was wrong with my spine, but they didn't know what. And so rushed me to the ER, did a bunch of MRIs, and they found out I had transverse myelitis, and it can happen anywhere along your spine. So I'm really lucky it happened to me at T10, which is like your belly button area, but it could have happened to me in my neck and I would have stopped breathing. It could have happened, like there's any number of things that could have gone worse.
So that night you
Yeah.
got that diagnosis.
Hmm.
I mean, it's like you went from 0 to 100 miles an hour. Like you like,
Yeah, like that day I'd gone to school, hung out with my friends, got ice cream, went to soccer practice, and then that night I was paralyzed and I was admitted into the ICU.
and because the diagnosis was so clear,
Hmm.
were they, did you have a sense that this was permanent? Like, did you do, like,
No,
what was the,
I think that, you know how you hear stories about your brain like blocking out certain traumas and you don't remember all of
yeah.
things. I don't remember the entirety of that month. I was in the hospital, Children's Hospital in San Diego for over a month. In their rehab and in ICU and things like that. And I only remember little snippets of it, but I do remember having denial about what was going on. Like, I would have friends come visit me or they would give me presents. And I remember there was one specifically, I think like a stationery kit. And I remember telling my mom, like, oh, I'll use these to write you letters when I go away to camp. And I think my mom, like, she must have heard that and been like, she doesn't get it. Like, she's not going to camp with her friends in like a month or so. Do you know what I mean? And I think that just didn't click for me. And I remember doctors telling me, like, you're not going to walk again. You're not going to feel your legs again. And I think I heard it, but I didn't internalize it until much later.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're 10. So you're like in fifth grade?
I was in fifth grade. Yeah. And I think, like, I mean, age, regardless of age, I think when you live your life a certain way and then all of a sudden it changes, like, your brain just can't really comprehend, like, this doesn't work anymore because, like, there was nothing traumatic really that happened to me in terms of like a car accident or something that I could rationalize. So I think it just took a really long time for me to really figure out, like, okay, my life is not the life that I had 72 hours ago.
Yeah. Cause like if you get sick, you
Mhm.
recover, right?
Yeah.
Even as an athlete, you get injured, you recover. And
Yeah.
so the idea of this like permanent, right?
With no relative rhyme or reason either.
Right? It's so weird. It's really
Yeah,
strange.
super weird.
I think so. So your journey in getting through this is really, really interesting for me. And part of it is because, and you probably know just enough about me to realize that I'm the guy that chases people down on the street that have a disability,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
I literally chase them down. Uh, Uh,
Super advocate for all of us. Love it.
it's
Someone got to do it.
it's a little bit of a sickness, I think. Like I can see people behind me. I really can. And anyways, and with Angel City, we do a lot of outreach, right? We're in the community, we're out, we're at the Abilities Expo, we'll attend any event, we'll go anywhere people ask us to go, right? That's like our joy is finding new athletes, right? And I know you love that experience of working with new athletes. But what I find is adults that have a similar situation, right? That might even be more clear than yours, right? Like spinal cord injury, boom, you're this is it, right? Like it might even be more crisp, the message that they get, but then they slide, right? They go into this really tough place. And I feel like they're harder to get out of that place the longer they sort of slide.
Totally.
And so I really want to understand, like, what was it for you that allowed you to, I mean, you might have had a slide, you had some denial, but like what was, right, what worked in terms of like getting your head up?
It was 1,000% my mom. I had no interest in adaptive sports. I'm really embarrassed to say now that I'd never met anyone that was in a wheelchair, had a disability that was not an elderly person.
Yeah.
So I thought that every person with a disability that was younger was also mentally disabled, which just speaks to the fact that I had zero exposure, you know? And
Right.
so when I heard about adaptive sports, immediately I was like, no, I'm an active kid. I'm used to, you know, real sports. Like I don't want to play wheelchair sports with someone that's going to be drooling on me or something. Like these were my horrible preconceived notions. I had no idea that it would be competitive. I had no interest.
But so to connect the dots then, are you saying sport was what helped you sort of get back?
1,000%. Like everything that you're saying in terms of the title of this podcast is literally me.
I love it.
And I'll speak to that when I talk about when I liked sports. But yeah, my mom, when I was in the hospital, I think she was talking to rehab therapists. She was talking to anybody that she could about different things that I could be doing to be.
Oh, interesting. So you're still in the hospital, and your mom, like I like to say, your mom's like out in front of you, right? Like figuring things out, doing the research, trying to understand what's going on, what's possible. Is she thinking that way? Like what can my daughter do?
Yeah, I think, you know, I make jokes about like tiger moms and stuff. I'm half Chinese. And so, and the side of my family I'm most close to is the Chinese side of my family. That's my mom. And I know there's all sorts of like cultural generalizations that, you know, Asian kids are held to a certain standard and stuff. And I think that although my mom isn't that complete stereotype, she is very strict and she does expect a lot out of me. And I think that was almost like a blessing in terms of my recovery, because when I came home, I remember thinking like, this is great. I'm in a wheelchair now. I'm not going to have to do chores. I'm not going to have to do X, Y, or Z around the house. And
You're
the first
wrong.
thing that she had me do when I got home was empty the dishwasher. She was like, your legs don't work, but your arms still do. Like, get to work. And she never really like coddled me. Not to say that she didn't love me a whole lot. I always felt very loved, but she didn't, you know, baby me just because I was physically disabled.
Yeah.
And sports was another thing. So when I was in the hospital, like you said, she was already looking for things for me to do to be back to that active kid again.
So you're in the hospital for a month. There's some denial in there. At what point do you, like, when by the time you get released, are you kind of accepting your situation, or like when does and I'm not saying full self acceptance, more like acceptance of the situation, right? That like, oh, this is real.
I think probably it started to hit me when I was in the rehab center, maybe closer to the time that I was staying in the hospital, because I thought it was going to be one of those things like we mentioned where, you know, you hurt your back and then a little bit later you're okay again.
So you really did you believe, you believed somewhere in your brain, you heard the doctors, but then also you sort of had this other belief, almost like an imposter belief or something that says, I'm going to recover. Or you just were, or was it just confusing?
I think it was a little bit of confusion, but I'm a very stubborn person. My mom likens me like a football player. Like when I want something, I'll go first down, second down, third down, fourth down, like kind of get what I want. Which makes me sound like a really horrible person to be around. It's not that bad, but I think that was kind of like a blessing in disguise in terms of my recovery. Cause I was like, you know, I heard them say I'm not going to walk again. Well, now I really want to. Do you know what I mean? And so I was kind of like, well, I'm going to go to PT every day. I'm going to do my exercises all the time. I'm going to prove them wrong. And like, whether or not that was something that, you know, you can't change biology and like whatever happened to me physiologically in my body. But I do think that mindset was a huge shift for me in terms of like really working at it.
Yeah.
And so I think I did start to accept the disability at that time, but I didn't fully accept it in terms of just like laying over and allowing it to kind of be it. Do you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
this is my new kind of course of life, but that's not all that, I'm not going to settle for that, if that makes sense.
So you're alluding to a little bit of your character pre-disability. So talk to me about that. What, like, the kind of kid that you were? Obviously, you're really athletic, and
Yeah.
you said you were stubborn. But like,
Yeah.
what else? Like, how would you describe yourself as that little kid?
Um, I've always been a really like a chatty kid. My mom said I was always able to like play on my own. I would like, have little stuffed animals and have them do like different
Just like
plays.
your dog. It's like apple and
Yeah,
a
just
tree.
like my dog. I mean, it's like she's like my kid. I should get a DNA test. Somehow she's related to, I don't know. But my mom would always say that I was really chatty. I was always a really social kid. I was always the type of kid that wanted to be like teacher's pet in a way. But then also at the same time, when I was home, I had a mouth on me. Like I never did bad things, but I would talk back. Like I always had kind of like that little witty
Yeah,
about me. So I think for my mom, she kind of got like exasperated with me as a kid a little bit.
sure.
But yeah, I guess that's just like my stubborn side coming out. I've always been very curious. I want to know why things happen, which I think is probably why this disability at the time was very confusing for me, because transverse myelitis is actually so rare. There's not enough research for them to know why it happens even to this day.
Yeah.
So that's just something I've had to kind of like be okay with not knowing the why to something.
But also, like, you're not alone. Not saying just with your disability, but there are a lot of disabilities out there we don't really understand.
Yeah,
And
there's no real rhyme or reason to it. It
right.
just kind of happens.
So that's kind of, it's a strange place to live, right? With this sort of a little bit of uncertainty. Um, okay, so so you're in rehab, you're sort of grinding, right? You're kind of motivated to like be better, or at least be the best you can be, whatever, however your brain is thinking about it. You get released and sort of have to go back to your life.
Yeah.
Well, like, how is life now? And like, are you like traumatized because like it's so different?
Yeah. I think again, I don't remember a whole lot about it. I do remember different like snapshots. Like my house growing up was a split level house. So obviously not super accessible for a kid that's in a wheelchair. I'm able to walk a little bit now, but at the time I was a complete para. I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't stand. I couldn't do anything. Like I needed the slide board to transfer. Like that's how disabled I was at the time. So they had to move my bedroom downstairs. They had to move the office upstairs, do all sorts of stuff to modify the house. I think my dad and a couple neighbors built like ramps outside for me and all sorts of stuff like that. So in terms of just my home that I lived in for 10 years, that was suddenly very new for me in terms of like, wow, okay, I sleep downstairs now while the rest of my family sleeps somewhere else. Like, so that already psychologically
And you're
is,
young. I mean, 10
yeah.
is not old.
No, it's not. I remember being really scared. Obviously, then there's the factor of being a young girl and like 10 years old, you're starting to become a teenager. You want to look pretty. You want to wear the same outfits as everyone else. Like, I'm sure any girls that are in a wheelchair listening to this will understand certain outfits that look good when you stand up do not look good sitting down. And that is really frustrating when you're a
You should
young
totally
teen.
start like a blog to explain this, because this doesn't really make sense to me.
So
But
many girls that hear this are going to be like, yes, oh my God, finally someone is saying this out loud. Uh, that was really hard for me, like, and then going back to school, seeing, boys that you had crushes on, or even just like friends,
yeah,
all of a sudden seeing you in a wheelchair now. Like
yeah.
those things are socially really hard. I think girl or boy, but just at that age, that's really tough because that's when you're like super hyper conscious of like, what do I look like? What am I saying? Do I look stupid?
And you dropped right back into the same school, same class, same kids, everything. Like, you didn't
Yeah.
miss a beat, right? You didn't like do it. Nothing really changed. You just.
Oh, I went right back I went into sixth grade. I think it was really lucky that it was at the same school because the school that I was at was the same kids from pretty much like first grade.
Yeah.
So these kids had known me for a super long time. So it wasn't like I immediately went to a new school and I was newly in a wheelchair and all that stuff. I think that would have been awful. So these kids already knew who I was as a person. So I didn't feel like I had to overcompensate for the wheelchair, which is something I do kind of feel like I have to do now, but we can talk about that another time.
Let's take a quick break to learn more about the Equipment Loaner Program at Angel City Sports.
Part of our mission at Angel City Sports is to eliminate all barriers to participation in adaptive sports. Providing free adaptive sports equipment is a major component to this objective. Each individual piece of equipment can cost more than $3,000. Can you imagine if running shoes cost that much? So we're building an inventory of adaptive sports equipment to support our clinics, competitions, partner programs, and to loan out to emerging local athletes. Currently, we have racing wheelchairs, throwing chairs, and sport wheelchairs, perfect for tennis and basketball. If you or an athlete you know need a piece of adaptive sports equipment, visit the Equipment Opportunities page at angelcitysports.org. If you are interested in donating equipment or supporting the Equipment Loaner Program, email us at info@angelcitysports.org.
Yeah, so I have this theory, or my wife and I kind of developed a theory that people from small towns kids that grow up with disabilities are going to be better adjusted. Doesn't mean in the long run anybody else can't catch them, but like if you just said, okay, plucked a random person from a small town and a random person from a big town, the small town person is a little more self-adjusted and self-confident because they just, oh, that's just Jimmy with one leg or whatever, Susie that's in the chair. We know her our whole lives. And it's like, right. It's like you find that acceptance a little bit in a smaller community. So you kind of had that in a weird way because you just had the same crew that you grew up with.
I did. I think that's actually such a interesting and like completely valid point. Like when people know you as a person and the chair kind of goes away and they just see you, like you were saying, Sally with one leg or whatever, that's so much easier to, I guess, like socially adapt to because you don't think you're always on and people aren't always staring at your chair again and always having to, judge you for why does she look
it's like the disability for people you don't know, right? When you walk in with a prosthetic or you roll in your chair, for whatever reason, society is still sort of backwards, I think a little bit, but like, it's like this shadow that is enormous that you have to address before you can do anything else, right?
100%. And that's what I kind of meant with the overcompensating thing. Like even now when I meet people, I think maybe that's why you see me as someone that's maybe super positive and stuff, because I think I've learned to become that way. Not that I was like this crotchety old woman before, but I feel like I have to try to be prettier than the average girl or be funnier or be more put together and more organized just to overcompensate for the fact that I obviously look very different from the average person and that unfortunately society won't take you seriously unless you compensate.
Okay, that's really interesting. So I think we got to work, as a society, we have to address this because this sort of breaks my heart, but I think you're right. So when you were younger, and it sounds like even now, like, what were some of those challenges and those darker moments? I mean, did you get teased and bullied or discriminated against? Like what was like the crappy part of your journey,
I was really lucky that I was never bullied. A lot of the other tennis players that I know, I've heard stories where they were bullied really badly in school. I feel really lucky that never happened to me. And I think part of that is
I think you're the first person
really
with a disability that I've heard say. It's just like doesn't happen. I mean, it's like
I've never been bullied by other kids for my disability. I have been, I don't know if you'd call it bullied. I've definitely been marginalized by adults.
Sure.
So there have been some stories I've had. For instance, I was in college and I was buying groceries all on my own, shock. And I was in Target. I was in the frozen food aisle. And I remember I'm just, grabbing, I don't know, corn or something out of like one of the refrigerators. And I hear this woman maybe like 50 feet behind me. And she's like yelling and she goes, "You're doing really well. Like, why are you doing so well?" And I'm like, was she talking to me? Like, I turn around and I go, "Excuse me?" And she repeats herself. "You're doing really well. Why are you doing so well?" And I remember looking back at her and I'm like, "I'm sorry, I don't really understand how to address your question." Because that's a really weird thing to ask someone.
Yeah.
And then she follows it up by going like, "Well, you're in a wheelchair. Like, where's your handler?" And I remember just being like, "What? My handler?" Like, that is obscene. But that was just like, I don't even remember what I said to her, but
what even can you say? Like,
I think it's just one of those things where you have to be like, do you know what? Like, this is just something that I do every week. I go out and buy groceries just like you. Like, thank you for being concerned about me. But, and there's a lot of times where you want to look at her and, say a lot of choice words. But then I kind of remember that I have to kind of advocate for other people with disabilities, because if I choose that one opportunity to fly off the handle on her, unfortunately, everyone's going to be painted as that type of person. But I've had it recently when I went to London. Even I was buying something again. I had already paid for my whole purchase, used my own credit card, signed a receipt, did all of that stuff that should like imply to this person that I'm a fully functioning adult. And then my friend Allison was behind me and she goes to pay for her stuff. And while I'm still in earshot, the guy talks to her and goes, "Oh, so I see you guys are here. We are both working at hospitals together for our rotations for school." And he goes, "Oh, so are you here helping her?" And then my friend Allison goes like, "Oh no, like she's just my friend. Like we're both working here." And then he goes, "Well, if you're not helping her, like why are you with her?"
Whoa.
Like she was like, "What?" I couldn't believe it. And I could still hear him. And then and she was like, "People in wheelchairs can have friends. Like this is a really stupid thing to ask me." But that sort of thing doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Or people will just talk slowly to me as if I can't understand what they're saying, like crouching down to talk to me. It's like patronizing. Things like that happen a lot. I don't always get the obscene remarks, but those things I guess have happened to me, whereas bullying in schools never really did.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, what a blessing. But it's just like a different form, I guess. This just being, I don't know, like not counted out, but sort of underestimated, I guess is the better word.
Yeah.
It's related to a concept that I know you'll appreciate, which is like you're inspirational just for like rolling across the street.
Yeah, I'm inspirational because I'm not stuck in my home, and that drives me insane.
What is that? Like that's crazy, right?
And that happens so much where people see me just like get my wheelchair out of the car and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like bless your heart." And you're like, "Okay, thank you, like you too."
Right.
Like you think they're being so nice, but then at the same time, you just want to hold up a mirror to them and be like, "Do you hear yourself? You sound like a freak right now. Like leave me alone."
I know people are so clueless. I mean, some of it is well-intentioned, which is super sad that it like backfires so wrong. Like they're literally 180 degrees the wrong way, right? But they're sort of efforting, which is sort of sad to think. Okay, so all right, so you've already given a few nuggets about like kind of like how did you end up where you are and how to sort of process the loss of ability. So you gave your parents a bunch of credit. You had a really good school situation, which is so good. Those junior high years, those like pre-teen years are brutal for all of us, right? And so to have that, like that sound, anything else that either you feel like you did right or your parents did right, or like any other sort of strategies?
Outside of sports, I think it really just goes back to the fact that like my family and my friends didn't really treat me any differently. And I think that's just because like I said, I mean, I did eventually switch schools once 7th grade happened, but for that full year of coming back to school in 6th grade, I was still Dana, like the kid that people knew. And they were just kind of getting to know me in a wheelchair the same way I was getting to know myself in a wheelchair. So it was almost like I got to kind of discover that with my friends. You can kind of see my dog in the background. There she is. And the same thing with my family. Like my brother still teased me. He didn't treat me any different. We still played together all the time. My mom didn't treat me different. My dad didn't treat me different. So I think in a sense for like my own brain, I never saw myself as broken in that sense or being like super fragile.
And how, so I have a theory and I probably need to like write an article about it or a blog post or something, but I think that parents are the hidden heroes of the Paralympic movement and maybe of like disability in general. I just spend more time with people, in the movement. So that maybe is why I start there. But like, how much of your parents' ability to get through this and process this is the fact that they were doctors? Like they like, was that like a critical piece? Like if they were teachers or something else, maybe they didn't have the backgrounds to like help solve some of the stuff for you?
Yeah, I think the fact that I can walk now and feel my legs is literally due to the fact that my parents are doctors. So with the way that transverse myelitis works, your immune system attacks your spine and there's swelling that happens in the spine as a result to like the trauma. And then your nerve, like you have your whole nerve bundle in your back, right? And that can literally like rip apart with that swelling. The faster you get to the hospital and get steroids in your system with an IV, that swelling goes down. So the fact that both my parents were doctors meant that I got to go through the ER faster. If I had to wait there the way that the average person does, I don't think I would have gotten any return back, because that swelling would have just kept happening and happening and happening. Whereas I was able to get in fast enough to kind of combat that. So although my legs will never be fully normal again, quote unquote normal, I was able to get return back because they were able to get me in there and knew something was wrong.
So like every minute counts when that's going on.
Every second. Yeah. And so, but then in a psychological sense, I think it really brought me close, at least to my mom. My dad, I'm not really close to my dad at all. We don't really have a great relationship. But during this time, especially my mom, like I really leaned on her just because I knew she understood what was happening to me. So I could ask her questions and she was able to answer them.
Like from a medical standpoint.
From a medical standpoint, it would be like, Mom, this hurts. Is this normal? Is this okay? Is this going on? Especially after I was discharged from the hospital. So I always felt really safe with her because I feel like, not saying that a parent who's not medically trained couldn't provide for their kid in that moment. Of course they can. And hundreds and thousands of parents do that all the time.
Yeah,
but
mostly people don't have parents, right, with medical backgrounds. They have to figure it out.
Exactly. But I think for me, being so confused as to what was going on with my body, and I think because it was an autoimmune disease, after my hospitalization, my body went nuts. Like I got pneumonia. I think I popped a lung at one point. I had all sorts of different things going on. And so I was sick like all the time for a good year, maybe more than that. And so knowing that my mom was there was really comforting to me. I never felt like, oh my God, I'm dying, get me to the hospital. Like I trusted her.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, like I've read some books and stuff that like you just in your life, you just need like one person that believes in you. Right. Like you don't need, I mean, it's nice to have a team or a community, but like this is one person that like
literally need one.
just crazy to think. And you had that in your mom and then your brother, obviously, and, you know, friends. And that's amazing. All right. So let's go back to your journey in adaptive sport. Cause it's just, you kind of moved up quickly, I think, in the ranks. But like how fast after you got released from the hospital or rehab, right, did you actually go to your first adaptive sports event? And if I've done my research right, Karen Korb was there, right? Is that true?
Yeah.
Or was she, or one of the first ones you went to?
My first ever sporting event, I'm not really sure chronologically when it happened. I don't think it was immediate. I think it was at least a year or a year and a half out. So I was maybe around 11 or 12, but I went to a camp that was very similar to Angel City Games. So it was in San Diego and it was the JAWS sports camp. So Junior Adaptive Wheelchair Sports Camp. And I've
heard about this. It doesn't, it's sort of right. It's
gone now. It's gone now, but it was before Angel City was born. So, which makes me sound really old. I hate that. But that was my first kind of like introduction to wheelchair sports, which is why I have such a soft spot for Angel City Games, because I think multi-sport camps like that are a godsend for anyone that's new to the disabled world, because you get to literally have a buffet of things that you can try. So for me, I remember I was assigned to like the orange group with other little kids kind of like me. And that was the first time I met kids with other disabilities. Yeah. I'd never, met anyone, like I said, that was younger, that was using a wheelchair or had an amputation or what have you. So that was already socially very new for me. Then I got to try basketball, hockey, tennis. Like I think there was water sports like sailing, jet skiing, like all sorts of stuff for a whole week. And then after that, my mom signed me up for different tennis camps, basketball, rugby. Rugby was the first one that I did, then basketball, and then tennis after that. But for all of those sports, for whatever reason, I was always like, I don't want to go. And I think that was partly my brain just not wanting to accept, like, this is my life now.
Yep.
So it had nothing to do with like, because at the time I did realize like, okay, these are sports, like these kids are very competitive. This is actually fun. But I think it was just that last kind of like digging my heels in, like, I'm not ready for this to be who I am.
And this is let me just pause you here, because this is a really interesting point, which is, and I, I'm a parent of 3 boys, and so I get it. But like, when you're a kid, there are a lot of moments where you don't really know what's in your best interest.
Yeah.
Right? And so your mom had to sort of override you and get your butt to these different camps and just kind of get you out and out and out, right? Like, talk to that. Like, I think that's really interesting. And like, was there a moment where you sort of the switch went on for you that you're like, oh, okay, this is actually a good thing for me?
Yeah, it didn't happen until I was at the camps, but my mom would always make comments saying,
So for you, it was just the traveling part to get to the camp. So
the travel to the camps, I was not interested. I was like, I would literally be in the car crying and like having a tantrum, in essence, like not wanting to go. And I remember my mom would always say this one quote saying like, I wasn't put on this earth to be your friend. And she would say that to me.
Sure.
And ironically, she's one of my best friends now. But at the time I was like, this woman sucks. Like I was not a fan because she was making me do all these things I didn't want to do. But she knew that it was what was going to make me feel like a whole person again. And so I'm so grateful that she did that. But I must have made her life awful at the time. But yeah, I remember with tennis specifically, once I got there and I picked up a racket, I met other Paralympians like Karen Korb. I think Sharon Clark was there. My current boss and my coach, Jason Harnett, was there. Dan James was also there. And I remember picking up a racket and playing, and it just kind of clicked, which is weird because prior to my injury, I never liked tennis. That was another one of the things that my mom had us play. And I always thought it was too slow, or I just couldn't get it. But I remember just like smiling like a ton at this camp. And they told my mom, like Karen pulled us aside and was like, I didn't play sports for a really long time. Like, you have a knack for tennis. Like, please don't make the same mistake that I did. Like, you need to keep playing. And I think they talked to my mom and said, like, we'll help get her like a secondhand tennis chair if she agrees to practice and play some tournaments. And I was like, let's go. Like, I want to do this. And I think that kind of reawakened that kind of like stubborn side of me where it was like, okay, someone's challenging me to do something. I want to do it. And that's kind of how tennis started for me. I started to go and play tennis after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the Barnes Center in Point Loma. And I was just starting from scratch. Like, I didn't know how to play tennis before. So learning how to push with a racket in my hand, learning how to move the wheelchair, doing all of that stuff was completely new to me. But I just like was a little sponge and just soaked it up and started to play tournaments. And then it kind of snowballed from there.
Well, it's so cool because I mean, listen, that's the job of a coach, right? Is to spot that talent when the talent doesn't even see it.
Yeah.
So they spotted you, they saw that you had that potential. And then I like to say like competence breeds confidence, right? Like if you just get a little good at something.
Yeah.
I'm good, right?
Yeah. Well, it totally, going back to what we were saying about how sports like literally gave me my life back or saved my life, it totally did. Like, I think in that time after my injury, I was not independent the way that I was independent days before. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because all of a sudden I needed someone to help me get in and out of a car because I didn't understand how to transfer from a wheelchair to a car, get onto my bed, or even sitting up, I couldn't do it first. Like, my whole sense of independence was gone. So, a whole myriad of things like that was suddenly what I thought was normal was no longer normal. And sports kind of reintroduced me to what my new normal was and made me realize how much my body can really do. And I remember being at a tennis camp and my mom was pushing my tennis chair for me. And someone came up to me and was like, why is she doing that? And it was almost like they were bullying me, but like in a very kind way. Do you know what I mean? And then I was
get your own gear here, right? Don't.
And I remember being like, well, I can't push another wheelchair. Like, what are you talking about? And he was like, yeah, you can. And he was a quadriplegic person. So I remember seeing that and being like, how the heck is he going to do that? And then he just goes and starts pushing his chair. And then I'm kind of like, oh, okay, so I can do that. And it was just a lot of little moments like that where I would observe and see what people were doing and realize like, oh, I can do that then.
I'd like to take a quick break to show you how you can get involved as a volunteer with Angel City Sports.
Are you interested in supporting Angel City Sports? We're seeking volunteers to help organize clinics and events, as well as support our athlete outreach efforts, marketing and media, and even fundraising and development. All skill sets and backgrounds are welcome in support of our mission to provide free adaptive sport opportunities for children, adults, and veterans with physical disabilities or visual impairments. For our younger athletes, we welcome you to join the Angel City Youth Leadership Council. Middle and high school age students are eligible to join the Youth Leadership Council, where you will learn about the disabled community by working side by side with our athletes and acquire important skills such as teamwork, leadership, philanthropy, and event management. To sign up for our volunteer newsletter and stay up to date on all upcoming opportunities, visit angelcitysports.org.
talk to me a little bit about Rio, because I think a lot of kids that come up through the Angel City community and others are aspirational, right? Thinking about the Paralympic Games. Like, did it meet your expectations? Like I was there as a spectator. And
Yeah.
I saw a lot of sport. You know,
Yeah.
I saw Wagner play a bunch. You know, the folks I was with loved the tennis, so we ended up at the tennis venue a ton. I don't remember if I saw you. I might have, but we saw just a ton of sport. But like, you know, what was that like as an athlete? And you were young. You know, you weren't the youngest on the team. Maybe in tennis you were, but like you were the youngest on the Paralympic team. But like, still kind of young in your career.
You know, my favorite tennis, or not tennis, but sporting moment in general actually happened in Rio. And it actually was not on a tennis court at all. It was during the opening ceremonies. I remember, you know, you're lined up outside the stadium. You've got all your Team USA stuff, and you hear the crowd chanting USA, USA, because they've done that thing where they've waited for all the countries to come in. You know, the thing where when you watch on TV, you get a little bored. Like, it's exciting, but you're kind of ready for it to be over. And so that time everyone knew USA was coming, and I heard the crowd start to go nuts. And so I start to get butterflies, and we're starting to go in the stadium and parading around, and you see flags and you kind of wave at them, you know, and kind of like soak in that feeling. And I remember like we circled around to our spot where we're eventually going to sit and watch the ceremonies. And I see this one flag going nuts, and I wave at it, and then it's like still going nuts. So I wave at it some more, and I looked really closely, and it was my mom, and it was my brother. It was my whole family, and my brother was like fist pumping. It makes me like teary-eyed when I talk about it now.
You're giving me chills, dude. That's great. Oh my gosh.
Like, this was a massive couple thousand people, or tens of thousand people stadium. The
Dude,
odds.
I was there.
Yeah. Like, the odds of seeing my family were slim to none.
It was like I don't know, 40 or 50,000 person, like soccer type arena that was packed, like filled to the rim.
It was fully packed. And so I remember for a while just going through, like, I've got goosebumps now thinking about it. Going in, you just see flags, and then it's like when you're on stage, you can't really see who's out there. But for whatever,
I'm sure it's
crazy. Eyes with them, and at that very moment, like, that's when I knew that I'd made it. And I know that sounds so cliche, but I was like, with tennis especially, because a lot of my competitions happen elsewhere, my family doesn't really watch me play because it's very expensive to come and follow me around. So to have them there was huge for me. And just to kind of see how excited my brother was. My mom was like crying, and like the flag she had wasn't even a flag. It was this huge like scarf that was like in the shape of a flag from Target. Like, she was just waving this thing, and I was like, that's my mom. And like, so that to this day is like my favorite sporting moment. And so in terms of Rio, like symbolizing like what it meant to me, that is probably, although in terms of my performance at the games, it was not something I'm proud of, because I feel like I could have done better in terms of just reaching that level of sport, and knowing that I did that within basically a year, to me means so much, because I know that, like, okay, I've done something really big, and I've reached that kind of level. And so I think just being there, like seeing all the different athletes, being in the Team USA, you know, uniforms, like, it's such an honor. And it's something that I think a lot of us get to do at different world championships throughout the year, but it's never on that scale, you know? So to be able to be in Rio competing, knowing like the gravity of that, having my family there, like, that was just such a cool experience. I think at that moment, I was mostly there more for qualifying for the games, as opposed to wanting to compete for a medal. Because at that point in my career, that wasn't really realistic for me. So I think in terms of where my head was at for that time, Rio was amazing and served all the purposes that it could have. But I think I'm kind of seeing Tokyo maybe in a different way.
All right, let's talk about Tokyo. What
Tokyo,
what are you gonna do in Tokyo? What are you gonna do?
Well, I don't want to jinx anything. So recently with tennis, I feel like I've kind of come into my own. I'm starting to really see who I am as a tennis player. I've started to have some really big wins. I'm able to compete, if not beat, all the people that are ranked ahead of me. So I think that I'm definitely, barring, you know, an injury or something crazy, like, there is totally a chance that I could get a medal in Tokyo, whether it's singles or doubles or what have you. And the fact that
equal, like, in your mind, do you think that the potential for singles or doubles is about the same?
I think that I am a stronger doubles player. Unfortunately,
Hmm.
the rest of Team USA doesn't travel the same way that I do, whether that's just different time commitments or financial restraints or what have you. So in terms of building a strong rapport with a Team USA member on tour, I haven't been able to do that.
Hmm.
Um, and that counts for a lot in doubles, just exposure to each other on the court and building that kind of team partnership. So unfortunately, I'm not sure how strong of a team will be going into a games. But then we won a gold in doubles at the Lima games. So anything is possible. I think that's what's so cool about tennis is that like ranking, once you're at a certain level, doesn't really matter. Like you see upsets all the time. It's really kind of, everyone can hit a good forehand once you're at a certain level. It's what kind of mental stuff you bring to the court that day that separates people. So I'm really excited for Tokyo, and the fact that, obviously I'm not excited about the pandemic, but it did give us a whole extra year to train harder and to be better by the time the games come. So I'm excited to see what I can do.
And how does tennis work, or at least how does tennis work in a pandemic? Meaning, was the team already set, and so you were already going, and then you got delayed, or is there still like some qualification process?
There's still qualifications. So tennis is kind of sticky in that we have a whole year to qualify for a game. So they call it a Paralympic year for us, where we have from, I believe, and someone that's within tennis is going to hear this and be like, Dana, you don't even know your stuff. It's from like, I believe it's from spring to spring, from spring prior to the games.
Prior year to spring of a Paralympic year.
Yeah. And so basically you have that whole year to rack up points and try to qualify for the game. Whatever you did the year before doesn't count.
Interesting. So in your case, when you were making the Rio team, that worked in your favor a little bit, right?
Yeah, because I wasn't defending points from a year before. Tennis is kind of weird in that we have to defend things. So for instance, say I went to the US Open and I got to the semifinals one year. In order to keep those points, I have to do just as well as that or better so that my ranking doesn't fall the next year. So for me coming into Rio, I didn't have anything
about ranking, right? It's the points that give you the ranking. That's what decides whether you make a team or not.
Yeah. And the national rankings don't matter for us so much. So there's not that many national tournaments that we play. Everything's pretty much international. So whatever we do in terms of qualifying for the games and all of that, it's all international. So everything's ranking based.
Right.
Yeah.
And so because of the year, so that 12-month window got sort of chopped last year. So did they restart it, or did they just take some of it from that year and then some of it from the upcoming year?
They're going to do some of it from the past and then some that's coming up. And what they did was they said that if you're unable to travel or compete, you basically don't have to defend your points. So they've kind of given some people some cushion. It's a little bit iffy because then people are technically just gaining points if they can travel and do stuff. So with tennis, it's never like a seamless solution because there's going to be some people in Australia that can't travel and go somewhere, or, now they're not as affected by Corona because they've done such a good job of containing it. So maybe they're going to be healthy and able to go places, whereas China is maybe different. So how can they open up this sport when not every country can travel has been really kind of a headache. I don't know how they're doing it in terms of like the ITF, the International Tennis Federation, that must have been just a nightmare for them to reorganize things. But
and these sports are all sort of, I like to say they're sort of elegant in their attempt to create a system of fairness, but they're not perfect, right? No. So there's always some drama, and whether it's around classification or qualifying.
Yeah, we got that too.
Always something, right?
There's always something that people are upset about or wanting to be better or wanting to be different. But yeah, tennis definitely has its fair share of drama. I always say that the tennis tour is like high school. Like there's always drama, there's cliques, there's rumors, there's all sorts of stuff too. So it's always interesting.
No, I think swimming, track,
oh yeah, it's all got to be the same because you're competing with the same people all the time. You're traveling with them. Like there's bound to be stuff that happens, but it's fun.
A lot of drama. Okay, so you're going to Tokyo, hoping to make it to the medal stand. what's after that? I mean, do you want to go to Paris? Do you want to compete in LA? Like, where does it end?
I'm gonna try to see where my career is at by Tokyo. So with tennis, a lot of sponsorship opportunities and then subsequent money is one when you play Grand Slams. So for people listening that aren't sure what the Grand Slams are, those are the big four tournaments that able-bodied players also play. So the Australian Open, Wimbledon, Roland Garros, or the French Open, and then the US Open. And for us, only the top 8 in the world are integrated into those events.
Mm,
And so I've been lucky that I get to play the US Open as a wild card because my ranking is high enough and then I'm American. So I usually get awarded the wild card to that event. But for the rest of the events, because I'm not, actually it's top 7 because the 8th is that wild card. Because I'm not in the top 7, I'm currently ranked 9. I'm outside of that,
mm,
which is a little frustrating to say that I'm ranked 9 in the world, but I'm still not good enough to play at a Grand Slam. Whereas for the able-bodied side, they actually have a field of hundreds of people. So for the able-bodied side, Grand Slams have the largest draws, whereas for us, for Grand Slams, it's the smallest draws. And so my goal is to get within that top 7 by that time, and then I would know that I would be able to make a lot more money. There's a
yeah.
lot more sponsorship opportunities. If I'm within that top 7, I'll keep playing. If I'm not, I think unfortunately I might have to look at other options just because it's so expensive to play tennis.
Right.
Um,
Especially
that
if you have to compete internationally, then that's like
yeah,
brutal,
it's
right?
so expensive. I think like all adaptive sports are expensive just due to equipment that we need, but tennis especially, like the flights, the entry fees for tournaments, all sorts of stuff really add up. And I'm lucky enough that I do have a lot of great sponsors, but it's not something where I'm like, rolling in money. And it would help if I was ranked higher and I was playing those slams because that's where a lot of prize money is. So
Mm.
I think it's definitely a doable goal, as long as tournaments don't get canceled with coronavirus this coming year, which could very well happen. And it's something that I really hope happens because I feel like now that I'm finally playing tennis full time, I'm sort of like realizing what I could do. And I don't really want to have any what ifs in tennis, but
Mm.
unfortunately, and this is the reality with a lot of other adaptive athletes at the Paralympic level, like it's, and Olympic athletes too, like there's not a lot of money in Olympic and Paralympic sport because they're not necessarily professional, like NFL type of sports. And so we a lot of times have to get different jobs or do other things. So I might have to go back and use my degree, which is also something I'm working towards right now anyways.
Let's talk about the career after sport.
Yeah.
So I guess like from a psychological or emotional standpoint, if you don't hit that number ranking wise that you want, and it's going to be another few years of struggle to maybe get it right, to sort of maybe, and you hang up the racket after Tokyo, are you emotionally ready to do that? And then talk to me about the career that you've been kind of building along right on the side, getting your education. I want to hear more about like what does that look like for you?
Um, at this point in time, I don't think that I will be emotionally ready to hang up my racket. I think for a lot of reasons though, and I think part of it, like, and a lot of Paralympians and even just wheelchair athletes of any level can relate. I think it's a big source of our identity, and it's
Yes.
a big thing that makes me feel like a whole human again. And that goes back to finding sport at that crucial time in my life where I was confused about who I was.
Yep.
And so I've always defined myself as a tennis player. And that's kind of been one of those things that you can pull out when you meet people and like, oh, that's really cool. I want to get to know you. So it's kind of like, if that goes away, I'm sure I know I'll always be a Paralympian, but once I'm not an active one, I think that scares me. Like, will I still have enough to offer people? Do you know what I mean? I think that will.
What's so interesting about this is I talk a lot about the power of sport to allow someone with a disability to define themselves as an athlete, not a person with a disability.
Yeah.
But so this is the danger of that strategy, which
Yeah.
is once the athlete thing goes away, I knocked my microphone. Right, once the athlete thing goes away, then you've peeled the onion back, and now you're just another woman with a disability.
I think, yeah, and
Right? I mean, like I'm not like not in a
no, but
negative, but, like
that's exactly how I feel about it. I think it's almost that it would be like almost a death. I know that sounds very dramatic, but it's literally a death of a part of me that has been literally all of me for such a long time. And I think that really scares me. I think like, so my career, I've been studying audiology ever since college. So I got my degree in speech and hearing sciences. I got my master's in clinical audiology overseas in London, actually, for the past 2 years. I did that. And now I'm working towards my doctorate in audiology. I've actually luckily been doing that online this whole time. So I've been doing that for pretty much my entire life. I've always been in school. But so in terms of audiology, I really do love that part. I like giving back. I like helping people. I think that kind of goes back to my love for science, and then also being affected by the healthcare system as a child. I want to be able to give back and help someone's quality of life that way. So it's not that I'm not passionate about that part of my life, but I think it's never been my whole identity. And so that'll just be a big shift for me. But I think I am excited about the fact that it will be a very meaningful part of my life. I love interacting with patients. I love seeing a problem like, okay, you're not hearing something. And then, those videos that you see where you see a kid's hearing aid turned on and they hear their mom for the first time. Like, that's literally my job. And that's so cool. And it's so rewarding. And I like that like tennis, audiology is different. Like, so when you play a tennis opponent, they're different from the next opponent you'll have. And every match you play is different. Every patient that I see is different. It's a different puzzle for me to solve. And I like that. So tennis and audiology are actually, there's a lot of things that really overlap. So in terms of that part of my career, that next step, I am very excited, but also really nervous because it's never been something that's just been all of who I am, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you have to shed that other part, right? That's been the primary part of your identity.
Yeah. It's arguably like the coolest thing about me. And then it's just going to go away.
Well, just so you know, you'll always be super cool at Angel City because
that's all I really care about.
we do try to prop up the Paralympians and give them a lot of love and maybe we need to start I know once a Paralympian, always a Paralympian, but sort of a retired program
and outreach so we can feel in touch.
One of the last things I want to cover with you, it's really important to me, and it's really important to Angel City. It's important for us to figure this out, which is, and we've sort of hit on it along the way, but the journey to self-acceptance. When, you are not disabled for 10 years of your life, and then you acquire this disability, and then, you go through those preteen and the teens and college and all this stuff. At what point do you feel like you fully accepted yourself and your disability?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think that if I'm honest with you, I don't know if I fully have. I think there are still times where, as an athlete or as a student, if you ask me those in terms of a compartmentalizing thing, I can be super psyched about myself, really back myself. But there are still going to be days where I look in the mirror and I don't like the fact that I'm in a chair. I'm not sure if there's ever going to be that day where I wake up and I'm like, if someone offered me that pill to be completely able-bodied again, that I wouldn't really think twice about it. Is although my life in the wheelchair has afforded me all these amazing opportunities that I would not rewrite, that I would not change for a second, I would probably, have hesitations about not reversing, the way that my life is now, because I had those experiences as an able-bodied individual. And I know how much easier life is without a chair. So I think that if you want the fully honest answer, I don't know if there will ever be a day that I'm fully 1,000% or 100% accepting of who I am, in terms of the disability. But then on the same token, if you ask me, am I proud of the things that I've done? Am I grateful for the things that it's afforded me? Yes. And I would answer that without hesitation. So it's kind of a weird answer. I'm weirdly grateful for the fact that this happened to me because of the people that I've met. The fact that I'm talking to you sitting in this spot wouldn't have happened. If this didn't happen, I wouldn't have met you.
Never. Well, so, I mean, unlikely.
Maybe. It's unlikely, but there's so many different things that have come into my life because of this. So I am extremely grateful for it. The fact that I found sport, the fact that I'm able to be considered a professional athlete, the fact that I've been able to wear USA on my back, have different honors like that.
again, would that little girl have made the U.S. soccer team and played in the World Cup?
Probably not,
I don't know, but like it's a good question.
I did love Mia Hamm as a kid, and so who knows if I would have ever been on Team USA for that. But yeah, I think I'm still kind of on that journey to fully accepting who I am, even though it's been now almost 20 years since I got hurt. I think, like anyone, there's going to be days where you wake up and you look in the mirror and you're totally all about you. Like, you look in the mirror and you're like, I look so good today. This is great. And then the next day you don't feel so great. That's just being human. And I think that's one thing that, is important for listeners to remember, that just because you're in a chair doesn't mean that you don't still feel the same things that an able-bodied person does when you look in the mirror. Everyone has the same struggles. They might look a little different, but they're all the same. And so I think that's something that I still go through too. I'm still really proud of the things that I've done, but it's definitely not ideal.
Listen, there's no right answer to that question, right? It's just trying to poke at your soul a little bit. And I think I appreciate the honesty. And I do think that congenitals have a little different journey.
Yeah.
They didn't know anything different. And so, I just think we just got to be careful not to judge each other, right? Depending on where we are. And you're right. Most of us, non-disabled people are struggling with self-acceptance just as much as anybody else, right? So it is a piece of the equation that we think a lot about and we're intentional about within the Angel City community. Because if you can't at least mostly accept yourself, you have no chance at self-confidence and goal setting and like all of the amazing things that you've done. So even though I know you're like being super vulnerable, I think like you couldn't have like built the life if you were if you were the girl that was in that state of denial in that early stage.
Absolutely
right?
not.
Or whatever. So like just like to be clear, like I get it, we're all on that journey, but like you kind of push.
1,000%. Like, I think, although I did say that it's like a road to accepting myself, I think in the grand scheme of things, I know who I am, and I've set goals for myself. I know who I am. I'm more or less very happy with who I am. And as cliche as it sounds, and like a plug, it really wouldn't have happened without adaptive sports. And it sounds like super cliche, but sports literally was the thing that saved me from being in denial, probably a little bit socially confused about how to navigate life in a chair. I was able to meet all sorts of different people, different backgrounds, realize what I was capable of, see the world, do all sorts of different things. And so, yeah, definitely in terms of things like Angel City Sports, any sort of organization like that, adaptive sports, what have you, like, huge impact on my life. I don't know who I would be without it. I'd probably be a very much more lost individual.
Well, I think too, especially for someone like you that's reached a pretty incredible level, right? Being whatever, top 10, hopefully crack that top 5 soon in the world. Like we are creating a place where people that have reached that pinnacle can kind of reach down the ladder and kind of pull the next generation up, right? Which is our MO is finding that next generation. Doesn't mean everybody makes the Paralympics, but I hope that they can start their journey of self-acceptance, right? And so for that, I think a community like Angel City, really the broader adaptive sports community, right, is a place where we can all kind of, especially former Paralympians, right, that hang up the racket or the cleats or whatever, like there's a place of purpose here, right? You're needed. You're really needed.
Well, and it's so important. Like I know for a fact that I probably wouldn't have seen tennis as such a viable thing for me to do for such a long time had I not met Paralympians or had I not met just other adults that were playing.
Right.
And that happens whether you're able-bodied or not, but especially it's important once you're in that disabled community because you see people to look up to. Like my mom would always joke, like, this was the first time that you saw like really feminine people in chairs and how pretty they were and like that they were successful women. And I kind of poo-poo that because it's more like it doesn't matter how they looked and stuff, but really like seeing successful women in a wheelchair, doing things, being pretty, socializing, doing all these things was mind-blowing for me as a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old or what have you. And so to be able to go back and coach at Angel City or go back and coach at different tennis events and stuff, it means the world to me because I know that when I was in that flip position it changed my life.
Yeah.
As cliche as it is, it's huge.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to wrap us up with a few soul-searching questions for you now that we're digging into this. What are your regrets?
Oh, gosh, how much time do you have? I'm like that overthinker person.
Big ones.
So I'll go on.
Big ones. Top 3 regrets if you've got them. I don't have that many either, but like, you know.
In terms of sport or just my life in general?
Life.
I think that I tend to shy away from situations that, at least socially, that scare me. So like in high school or college, maybe I regret not going to more parties or going to more things like that. Not that I wasn't social. I had a lot of like core friend groups and things like that, but I don't think I put myself in those really stereotypical college situations just because they kind of freaked me out, and maybe I would have had, you know, different experiences under my belt. I don't really feel upset that I don't have them per se, but I do kind of regret that I didn't experience more things. Other regrets.
Also, like you're kind of a nerd, right? You're super focused on academics, so like,
oh yeah,
you weren't the party girl.
No, I was never the party girl. No, I was comfortable with my little group of friends. And, you know, I was the type of person that knew everybody and was like comfortable being friends that way, but was never the party animal. And so maybe, you know, maybe part of me wonders what my life would have been like if I was a little more brave in that sense.
Yeah.
Let loose a little bit more. I think I've always been a very structured person. And so it would have kind of been interesting to see what I would be like if I kind of gave myself a little more of a break sometimes.
That's really interesting. Anything else?
Regrets, like massive regrets.
I mean, listen, it's good. It's good to live without regrets. I'm loving this.
I mean, I'm sure I have little ones here and there, but I guess I'm really fortunate that I don't have any huge ones that are sticking out at me right now. Although once we hang up, I'll probably be like, oh yeah, I could have said that one, or thank God I didn't remember that at the time.
I have a bunch. So I got to like rethink my life the next phase. All right, what brings you joy?
Lots of things. My family brings me joy. My friends bring me joy. My puppy that I just got brings me joy. I think sports obviously brings me joy. I think, you know, as cliche again as it might sound, there are a lot of times in life, and any person with a disability can relate, where you're reminded that you're disabled, whether it's how someone looks at you, or maybe there's not a curb cut, or, you know, little things like that. But when I'm on a tennis court, like, I'm free. I can move. I can in essence fly around. And, you know, that feeling of freedom is something that I love. And the fact that I get to do that every day as my job is amazing. Travel makes me super happy. Which I'm obviously not doing because of COVID, so I miss it a lot. But yeah, I think I'm really lucky that all the things I just described are pretty much what I get to do all the time. So I'm really kind of trying to savor this part of my life where I get to literally enjoy everything that I'm doing pretty much every day.
You know, what has having a disability sort of taught you about life?
That's a really good question. I think that, again, it kind of taps into like a cliche. I think that it really teaches you to value what you have. I think that just the way that my disability came on, and it's really no different than someone that wakes up completely fine and then gets in a car accident or goes diving and hits their head or whatever, like your life can change like that. And so
just to say it, just to before you keep going, in my analysis of the data, right? So there's about 15% of the United States has a physical disability, which is a lot.
Yeah.
Only maybe 1 to 1.5% of kids are born, right, with a physical disability.
Okay.
It might even be less than 1%. It's hard to say. The data is really bad because things go undiagnosed. So that means 90% of our community is acquired. And I think, to your point, most of them are kind of sudden things.
They are. And so that's why, like, although it is cool to talk to people and hear like, oh, what happened to you or what happened to you? Because everyone's got these cool war stories, more or less. Like, I think that, like you said, the gist of it is the same, that your life is one way. And then like that, it can change. Like, it's no different from, unfortunately, the California fires. Like, people lose their home. That happens all of a sudden. Or with COVID, like, people lose their jobs, or now you're on lockdown. Like, and I think that it's made me able to appreciate the things that I have and not always take them for granted, but then also be able to adapt when things change. And that's something that I know that, you know, we kind of joke like Paralympic spirit, or the disabled community is able to adapt and overcome. And, you know, it's become a cliche in our community for a reason. And that's because it's something that we're able to do because we've had to. I know in your family, you guys have definitely had to do that. And I think that's something that has made me a stronger individual and able to bounce back from things like the pandemic or things like that mentally. I don't know if you've kind of felt the same in your family, but I think that's the one thing that my disability has definitely awarded me in terms of life, is able to look on the bright side, find a solution to things, but then also really be grateful for what I do have at the same time.
Wow, I really, really love Dana, her story, her grit, her athletic accomplishments, and the best part of the story for me, her mother. Parents are always important in the athlete's journey, or at least frequently important in the athlete's journey. And next episode, we talk to Owen Bainbridge, our first international guest who tunes in from the UK. He's a blind soccer player on a quest to make the Paralympics one day.